We started the trip by flying into Guayaquil, which is Ecuador's largest city and main port. After a terrific day of local birding, we went in a day early. We flew to Baltra Airport, which is a small airport located right here, just north of Santa Cruz. From there, we went directly to our boat. So we got on our boat. We used this to travel around the Galapagos, visiting primarily islands in the central Galapagos and the West Galapagos. This was the perfect size for our group of 16 participants, plus 2 leaders and a terrific support staff. A few basic facts on the Galapagos. The Galapagos Islands are an isolated complex of volcanic islands of volcanic origin in the eastern Pacific Ocean. They're about 600 to 700 miles from mainland Ecuador and about 1,000 miles from mainland Panama. The nearest island is Cocos Island, which is about 600 miles to northwest. It is part of Costa Rica. As you can see from this map, the equator almost bisects the Galapagos. There are over 60 land masses in the Galapagos, including 13 major islands, which are defined as having an area in excess of 6 square miles, and many smaller islands. From an evolutionary biologist standpoint, the most significant is this tiny island here just north of Santa Cruz called Daphne Major. Also, for purposes of the discussion, keep an eye on Espanola Island here in the southeast Galapagos. These are young islands. The oldest islands are in the east. They are less than 5 million years old, and the youngest islands are in the west, Fernandina, which is less than 1 million years old. There is still ongoing activity on volcanic activity on some of these islands. These couple of photos will illustrate some of the stunning volcanic landscapes that you'll see on the Galapagos. This is an iconic rock formation called Pinnacle Rock. The Galapagos formed the Galapagos province of the Republic of Ecuador. As of 2020, there were slightly over 33,000 people that inhabited the Galapagos on 4 islands. About 97% of the Galapagos has been designated as a national park, and it is surrounded by the Galapagos Marine Reserve. Following their discovery by Spanish explorers in 1535, the Galapagos were named for the enormous number of giant tortoises that live there. Galapagos is an old Spanish word that can mean either a type of saddle or a tortoise. The reference to saddle is to one of the 2 types of shells that Galapagos giant tortoises have. You can see the upward curve in the center here resembling a saddle. For reasons that'll become obvious, I have supplemented some of my photos from the Galapagos with photos from the internet, and this is one of them. I'll try to point them out during the course of the discussion. The Galapagos are noted for their high number of endemic species, both plant and animal. About 45% of all plant species on the islands are endemics, meaning they're found nowhere else in the world. A total of 185 bird species have been recorded in the Galapagos and eBird, but most of those are rare or vagrants. A total of 34 species are endemic, and many other species have endemic subspecies. This is a list of the endemic species. The 34, the 17 on the right are all collectively known as Darwin's finches, and we're going to have a lot to say about those in a few minutes. You'll notice there's 4 mockingbird species at the lower side of the left-hand side of the table, and a sundry of other birds, most of which we're going to cover here. This is a list of species that have endemic subspecies on the Galapagos. Prominent endemic mammals and reptiles on the Galapagos include Galapagos sea lion, Galapagos fur seal, of course, the iconic Galapagos giant tortoise, several species of iguana, and lava lizards. Perhaps the most famous birds on the Galapagos Islands are a group of endemic species known as Darwin's finches, which currently consist of 17 species as a result of recent taxonomic splits. Historically, there were 13. Darwin's finches also include 1 finch from Cocos Island cocos finch that originate from the Galapagos, resulting in a total of 18 species for this complex. Darwin's finches are called and look like finches, as you'll see, but genetic analysis indicates that they're actually a member of the diverse and not the true finch family, the Fringillidae. One key clue to their ancestry is the type of nest they build. You can see this spherical nest with side entrances like those that are built by tanagers and their allies, and not cup nests like that are built by true finches. Darwin's finches are named after Charles Darwin and are inextricably linked to him and his theory of evolution, but ironically not due to his efforts. Darwin visited the Galapagos Islands for about a month in September, October 1835, while traveling around the world for almost 5 years on the HMS Beagle, exploring 4 islands and collecting specimens of various plants and animals, including several finch species, 2 of which he managed to misidentify, and none of which he tagged to the proper island. It's a myth that Darwin developed his theory of evolution by natural selection during or as a result of his visit to the Galapagos. And in fact, he slowly developed this theory after he returned to England in the following years, and not primarily on the basis of his observations of Galapagos finches. Indeed, Darwin wrote nothing about the Galapagos finches in his seminal work, The Origin of Species, which, by the way, is a prolonged argument in favor of natural selection, but says absolutely nothing about the origin of species. Darwin's finches have historic importance in the field of evolutionary biology for 3 reasons. First, they are a prominent and well-studied example of a biological phenomenon called adaptive radiation. Second, they were the first birds in which natural selection, the principal mechanism of evolution, was actually observed and studied as it happened in the wild. And third, Darwin's finches have been observed undergoing speciation in the wild, something that previously was thought to occur only over hundreds of generations. The evolution of Darwin's finches is a famous example of adaptive radiation, which is a process where a single species rapidly diversifies into new species by development of ecological and morphological diversity. All species, I'll get the hang of this soon, all species of Darwin's finch derive from a single ancestral seed-eating herbivore species that colonized the Galapagos 1 to 2 million years ago, and evolved build characteristics that enabled it to exploit the full range of resources available on the Galapagos. The result was extremely diverse builds and resulting feeding behaviors of Darwin's finches. This was possible due to the absence of competitors or predators, there being no other songbirds or other land birds on the Galapagos at that time. The ancestral species is unknown, but Darwin's finches are most closely related to a subgroup of the tanagers called the grassquits, and some of those grassquits look a lot like Darwin's finches. This slide illustrates the radiation of Darwin's finches on the Galapagos, with the oldest species on the right and the youngest on the left. It's been estimated that the ancestral species split into 2 lineages about 900,000 years ago. One produced the warbler finches here on the far right, and the other produced all other finches. And it's believed that all those other finches originated within the last 500,000 years or so. So these are relatively young species. This slide further illustrates adaptive radiation and indicates the differing seeds and the different types of ecological resources that certain of these species focus on. This page from a book by Charles Darwin that described his his travels on the HMS Beagle does the same. The number 1 is the large ground finch. Number 2 is the medium ground finch. Number 3 is a small tree finch. And number 4, with the smallest warble-like bill, is a warbler finch. A critical factor in the evolution of Darwin's finches is that the Galapagos islands are an archipelago, which allowed finches to move to other islands when circumstances, such as overpopulation, warranted, or simply by accident, and subsequently diverged genetically through natural selection to form new species from the original founding population. Dispersal to an area of geographic isolation is an indispensable element of what is called allopatric speciation. In addition to evolution resulting from geographic isolation, evolution in Darwin's finches occurred as a result of competition among Darwin's finches, because Darwin's finches do not remain isolated on individual islands and recolonize islands on which there are other species time and time again. Some islands on the Galapagos have as many as 10 species of Darwin's finch. This resulted in further ecological separation and evolution as these species sought to reduce competition for resources among them. This slide illustrates adaptive radiation in 3 steps. The initial colonization is 1 from mainland South America, 2 is the establishment of a second and additional populations, and 3 is secondary contact on San Cristobal with 2 or more divergent populations. During our trip, we saw 8 species of Darwin's finch, of which I was able to photograph 7, all but the large tree finch. The green warbler finch is the oldest and least finch-like of the Darwin's finches. It, along with the gray warbler finch, used to be one species. These species have warbler-like bills and are primarily insectivorous. This is my best poor photo of the green warbler finch, so I supplemented this with the internet, and you can see its small warbler-like bill. The woodpecker finch lacks any obvious features, like almost all of these Darwin's finches. They're not much to look at, other than a longish bill for a Darwin's finch, but it is among the most famous of bird species because of its tool-making ability. In order to extract grubs and insects from trees, it will find a hard, short twig or a cactus spine and actually break it into the right length and then use it to spear and extract insect prey from underbark or in crevices in trees. Tool use in birds is rare, but it's even rarer when the birds themselves actually make the tool for foraging purposes. The woodpecker finch otherwise acts like a woodpecker and appears to fill the ecological niche of woodpeckers on the Galapagos, on which there are no woodpecker species. And this supplements my photos of the woodpecker finch. The small tree finch is the smallest and the most common and widespread of the 3 tree finch species. As their name suggests, tree finches forage mostly in the trees on fruits and seeds, and rather than on the ground. And supplementing again with internet photos of the small tree finch. This is a female. The small ground finch is the most common finch species on the Galapagos, and along with the medium ground finch are the ones you'll first see after you land on Baltra Airport. As their name suggests, ground finches forage mostly on seeds on the ground. The medium ground finch exhibits substantial variation in bill size, so that there are, for example, larger billed medium ground finches and smaller billed medium ground finches, which can have an enormous effect on their ability to eat various types of seeds, as I will soon discuss. As you can be seen from these photos, the large ground finch has by far the largest bill of Darwin's finches. The common cactus finch has an especially distinctive bill, which is long, deep at the base, and often appears downcurved. This is the best photo I could get, so I supplemented this with a couple of photos from the internet of cactus finches, a male and a female. The process of evolution by natural selection in Darwin's finches was convincingly demonstrated by a British couple, Peter and Rosemary Grant, evolutionary biologists at Princeton University, who spent several months each year for almost 40 years, from 1973 to 2012, banding and studying all of the Darwin's finches on a small, uninhabited, treeless island in the Galapagos called Daphne Major. This is a photo of Daphne Major from our boat, and this is an aerial photo of Daphne Major showing the large crater at the center of it. etc. of it. The studies conducted by the grants demonstrated how the bills and body size of the medium ground finches on Daphne major changed in response to significant changes in environmental conditions, specifically 3 significant droughts. These conditions had significant effects on the supplies of plant seeds on the island and thus the availability of food for finches, as suggested by the following photographs, which illustrate photographs of the same by the grants, which illustrate the same area in Daphne major during a substantial drought at the top, during normal conditions in the middle, and after extensive rains at the bottom. As a result of a historic drought in 1977, the large, hard, sharply spiked seeds of a plant called Jamaican fever plant persisted, while smaller, softer seeds of numerous other plant species were not to be found. The result of the drought was a staggering loss of finches. They declined from about 1,300 in January 1977 to less than 300 in December 1977. The survivors had the largest, deepest bills because only they could crack the large, hard seeds that survived the drought. And those survivors were primarily males by a 6-to-1 ratio because they had the larger bills. As a result of the drought, the size of the bills of the medium ground finches on Daphne major was significantly and non-randomly altered, resulting in an island of larger billed medium ground finches. This was a major scientific breakthrough. Not only had the grants seen natural selection in action, it was the most intense example of it ever documented in nature. The grants also witnessed how natural selection altered the size of the bills of medium ground finches on Daphne major in connection with 2 succeeding droughts, but for differing reasons. In each case, the non-random survivors had smaller bills. I'd like to briefly mention the 3rd drought because it produced the opposite result of the 1977 drought. Like the historic 1977 drought, the 2-year drought in 2003-2005 substantially reduced the supply of small seeds, and only the largest, hardest seeds survived. Notwithstanding that, the selection resulted in a non-random survival of the population of smaller billed medium ground finches. Can anybody think of why that might be the case? This was attributable to the colonization of Daphne major by large ground finches subsequent to the 1977 drought, and them outcompeting the larger billed medium ground finches for the large seeds, and in effect forcing the medium ground finches to eat the few small seeds that were available. Medium ground finches experienced high mortality from the drought, but smaller billed birds fared better than larger billed birds. This is an example of ecological separation between 2 species competing with each other for resources in the same geographic area, something that has occurred in Darwin's finches time and time again. The characteristics selected for by non-random survival of medium ground finches following substantial droughts on Daphne major were inherited by the offspring, which had smaller or larger bills as applicable. Darwin thought that natural selection was a long, drawn-out process, but the grants demonstrated that natural selection and evolution in bill size can occur quickly within a year in medium ground finches. To pull this all together, the data compiled by the grants on medium ground finches during their visits to the Galapagos checked all of the so-called boxes necessary to demonstrate evolution by natural selection, of which there are 4. First, a variable characteristic must exist in a population, which in the case of Darwin's finches includes bill size, variations which can have a significant effect on the ability of finches to eat various types of seeds, and thus their ability to survive and reproduce. Second, the variable characteristic must be a heritable trait. This is the case with Darwin's finches. Studies estimate that bill size in Darwin's finches is about 74% heritable due to the presence of only 2 genes. Third, environmental conditions must change to a degree that will result in a non-random survival of a population with favorable characteristics as a result of death of other members of the population with less favorable characteristics. Natural selection occurs most strongly when the environment changes and inherently involves death of the maladapted and survival of the fittest. The survival of the fittest, by the way, was a term not originated by Darwin, and it was by Herbert Spencer, and was not included in Origin of the Species until the 5th edition. And finally, the non-random surviving population must preserve the naturally selected characteristics through breeding. Natural selection works within a generation, while evolution works across generations. Before leaving Darwin's finches, I would like to briefly discuss what is perhaps the most famous individual bird in the history of ornithology. It's called Big Bird, and it's not the big bird of Sesame Street. In 1981, an assistant to the Grants noticed an unusual male finch on Daphne major that had never been seen before. It was intermediate in size between the medium ground finches on the island and the large ground finches on the island, and had an intermediate sized bill that was different in shape, and it also sang a song that had never been heard before on Daphne major. After much effort, eventually it was determined by genetic data that this bird was what then was called a large cactus finch and what is now called Espanola ground finch, originating from Espanola Island over 80 miles to the south of Daphne major. Uncharacteristically, the Grants gave this bird a name, Big Bird, and not just a number like all of the other finches that it studied over the course of almost 40 years. Because there were no other members of its species on Daphne major, Big Bird proceeded to mate with the largest billed female medium ground finch available at the time on Daphne major. With the exception of one pairing in the first generation, the descendants of this hybrid combination bred exclusively with each other for 5 generations and over 30 years, forming in effect a new species or lineage under current scientific terminology that was never named because it was scientifically named because it was so young. This was another major scientific breakthrough, observed speciation in the wild. Scientists previously assumed that the formation of new species took a very, very long time, hundreds of generations or more. The Grants showed through the Big Bird lineage that a new species could be formed in as little or as few as 2 generations, and that new species can be formed within a short period of time under the right conditions. This diagram portrays in a simplistic fashion, because it omits the first generation, the Big Bird lineage or formation of the Big Bird lineage. Over here on the far right is your large ground finch. This is your medium ground finch female, and this is the Espanola cactus finch breeding with the medium ground finch to produce hybrid male and female and descendants that bred exclusively with each other. According to Irby Lovett, the most recent survey of the Big Bird lineage on Daphne major did not find any survivors of this lineage. Although the fate of this cryptic species is unknown at this time, its significance is not. The Grants believe that other species of Darwin's finch, existing and unknown, may have been created by hybrid combinations based on their long-term studies of hybridization in Darwin's finches and an increasing number of studies that shows that the enhanced genetic variation resulting from hybrid combinations can be conducive to the formation of new species when the environment changes or the location changes. Go on the wrong. This, by the way, is a photograph of a member of the Big Bird lineage. Darwin did not mention Darwin's finches or any of the Galapagos finches in his Origin of the Species, but he did note the Galapagos mockingbirds, of which there are 4 species on the Galapagos. The widespread Galapagos mockingbird, which has 6 subspecies, and then 3 other species of mockingbird that are only found on their specific islands. The Galapagos mockingbirds are another example of allopatric speciation through geographic isolation, but they have not undergone the dramatic changes in bill size and body size that were experienced by Darwin's finches and have remained segregated from each other with only 1 species per island, again, unlike Darwin's finches. This is likely because mockingbirds are ecological generalists as compared with the ancestor of Darwin's finches, which was an ecological specialist, a small seed-eating herbivore. Moreover, because these species have remained segregated, they have not forced each other into new roles through interspecific competition for resources. Galapagos mockingbirds, like other mockingbirds, are very tame, as indicated by this photo of one coming up and about to peck on my foot. The Galapagos mockingbirds, by the way, are not mockers. There's virtually nothing to imitate on the Galapagos Islands. The endemic Galapagos penguin is the most northerly of all penguins, being the only penguin that lives near the equator and the only one that can be seen in the northern hemisphere. At a height of 19 to 20 inches, the Galapagos penguin is the second smallest penguin in the world after New Zealand's little penguin. During our trip, we saw Galapagos penguins on land and underwater while snorkeling at a couple of locations. Now note how penguins use their wings. They literally fly through water. This video is courtesy of Irby Lovett. If you like snorkeling, the Galapagos are for you. We went snorkeling every day on our trip, and towards the latter part of the trip, we had the opportunity to go snorkeling a couple times a day if we wanted. Another iconic bird of the Galapagos is the flightless cormorant. It's both the only known cormorant that has lost the ability to fly and the largest extant cormorant species. As shown in these photographs, the wings of flightless cormorants are obviously disproportionately small, making them almost appear comical when they spread their wings to dry in typical cormorant fashion. The keel on the breastbone, which anchors the large muscles needed for flight, is also substantially reduced in this species. Natural selection likely disfavored flight by flightless cormorants for several reasons. Flight was not necessary in an essentially predator-free environment to avoid capture by predators. The flightless cormorant obtains food primarily through diving, and unlike the penguins, does not use its wings to fly through water or otherwise move through water. The flightless cormorant does not need to travel to breeding grounds. It's essentially restricted to the cold waters of the Western Galapagos. Flight became more costly as the flightless cormorant evolved to become larger and heavier than its ancestor, transferring weight and resources from its wings to its large legs and its very large feet. And flight can also be a high-risk behavior on isolated oceanic islands. Darwin never saw a flightless cormorant, but he did study numerous species of flightless beetles on the Galapagos and on other oceanic islands. And he made the observation that flight can be a high-risk behavior on isolated oceanic islands, because if a flying insect or a bird gets blown out to sea by a severe storm, it may not be able to get back. And if it gets lost at sea, it takes its genes providing for strong flight with it. The swallowtail gull is an air-endemic breeder on the Galapagos and unique in being the only fully nocturnal gull and seabird in the world. It preys primarily on squid that comes to the surface at night and is mainly active only on nights without strong moonlight, and thus during the darker part of the lunar cycle. Adaptations for nocturnal foraging include very large eyes, although surprisingly, a recent study found that this species' eyes are no larger than the eyes of similarly sized gulls. This is a juvenile swallowtail gull. This is a photo from the internet where I tried to really get a hold of the large eyes of this nocturnal forager. And this illustrates the swallowtail, for which the species is named, in its beautiful tricolored upwing pattern that resembles that of a Sabin's gull. The endemic lava gull is the rarest gull in the world, with an estimated population of only about 400 pairs, which appears to be stable for this low density gull. The lava gull is genetically very close to our slightly smaller laughing gull, and presumably evolved from a laughing gull type ancestor that became resident on the Galapagos. The Laffey gull's dark plumage allows it to blend with the lava coastline habitats on the Galapagos and is believed to help disguise it from fish and crab prey in the water. The Galapagos hawk is an endemic. It's the only diurnal raptor in the Galapagos, which makes raptor identification there easy. The Galapagos hawk resembles a dark morph Swainson's hawk, and genetic data indicates that Swainson's hawk indeed was its ancestor on the Galapagos. The Galapagos hawk is very tame, and during our trip, we watched a Galapagos hawk eat a dead marine iguana for a prolonged period of time within 10 feet of us. Although it is an apex predator, because it also is a scavenger, Darwin mistakenly called this bird a carrion buzzard. This is a juvenile Galapagos hawk. The endemic Galapagos flycatcher is one of only 2 flycatchers that currently may be seen on the Galapagos. The other is the endemic Bruhu flycatcher, which was formerly considered a subspecies of the very similar, virtually identical vermilion flycatcher until it was recognized as a separate species in 2021. The Galapagos flycatcher was formerly named the large-bill flycatcher and assigned to its own genus outside the Myarchus genus, but it clearly looks like a Myarchus and presumably evolved from one of them, most likely the brown-crested flycatcher. The endemic Galapagos dove is a very attractive bird that prefers to stay on the ground where it eats fruit and seeds and very rarely takes flight. The endemic Galapagos martin is very similar to our slightly larger purple martin, particularly the males. This species is uncommon and endangered with a population estimated at less than 1,000 birds. Only 2 were seen during our trip, unfortunately not by me. The great frigate bird and an endemic subspecies of the magnificent frigate bird are prominent breeders on the Galapagos and endlessly fascinating birds. The Galapagos essentially represent the easternmost range of the great frigate bird and the westernmost range of the magnificent frigate bird. One of the most memorable things that we did on the Galapagos was walk through a colony of great and magnificent frigate birds and blue-footed boobies, where we saw males conspicuously courting females and young of both species in their nests. It doesn't seem to be changing. There we go. Okay, let's see if that works. I don't think it's still working on M. Okay, let's go back. So males court females by inflating this red gular sac with black stripes or dots on the sides so that it looks like basically a large balloon. And they point their heads skyward and loudly clap their bills at overflying females to try to attract them for mating purposes. Frigate birds can be very difficult to identify. Males are essentially almost impossible to identify, particularly in flight. A sheen color can help identify them when they're on the ground. They're almost all black and they're very, very similar in size. Females and juveniles are a lot easier to identify. The female magnificents have a black throat like this bird here, and the female great frigate birds have a whitish gray throat. You can see this is a female magnificent frigate bird in flight. The juveniles are even easier to identify. The juvenile magnificent frigate birds have white heads, and the juvenile great frigate birds have buffy heads and necks. Three species of booby may be found on the Galapagos: the blue-footed booby, which is represented by an endemic subspecies, the Nazca booby, and the red-footed booby. The blue-footed booby is the most frequently sighted and typically the first type of booby seen by visitors because it is an inshore feeder and is often seen plunge diving in bays throughout the Galapagos. The blue color of the blue-footed booby's feet is attributable to carotenoids in its diet, its fish diet, and is a source of sexual selection. And most of these are photos, or a lot of these photos are from the colony of blue-footed boobies that we walked through on North Seymour Island. So, the Nazca booby is a native to the Eastern Pacific that breeds primarily in the Galapagos Islands. It was long considered a subspecies of the mask booby until 2002, when it was recognized as a separate species. The main distinguishing characteristic is bill color, bright red or orange in the Nazca booby and yellow in the mask booby. The brown noddy is one of two resident terns on the Galapagos, which is represented by an endemic subspecies that is found in coastal areas throughout the Galapagos. The other is the sooty tern. It nests only on remote Darwin and Wolf Islands in the northwest Galapagos, and as a result is infrequently seen by most visitors to the Galapagos. The brown noddy is a beautiful, graceful bird. It's chocolate brown except for a grayish crown, and it may be seen from land or boats while you are on the Galapagos. As indicated in this photo, the brown noddy frequently feeds by landing on brown pelicans in the hope that it can grab fish from its bill as it drains water from it. The brown pelican is represented in the Galapagos by an endemic subspecies, which has the unattractive name P.O. urinator. I know what you're thinking, but the name urinator is actually from a Latin word urinare, meaning to dive into water, and was given because the brown pelican, along with the Peruvian pelican, which used to be a subspecies of brown pelican, are the only pelicans that feed by plunge diving. Although it is a relatively recent immigrant to the Galapagos, having arrived an estimated 300,000 years ago, an endemic subspecies of the yellow warbler is perhaps the most abundant land bird on the Galapagos today. Taxonomically, the Galapagos yellow warbler is very similar or very close to what a subspecies known as the mangrove yellow warbler, which has a distinctive reddish-brown head and is a habitat specialist, basically being found only in mangroves from Mexico to Ecuador. Unlike the mangrove warbler, the Galapagos warbler has limited red on the head and is not a mangrove specialist, and is found in all ecological zones in the Galapagos, which include rocky beaches. An endemic subspecies of the white-cheeked pintail is the only resident duck in the Galapagos and the only duck species that we saw there. Interestingly, there are no records at eBird of mallards on the Galapagos. The lava heron was formerly considered its own species, but it's currently considered to be a subspecies of the striated heron. According to Irby Lovett, an Ecuadorian graduate student right now is conducting genetic research that suggests that this form should again be classified as a separate species. Like the dark plumage lava gull, the dark plumage of the lava heron is believed to be an adaptation for disguising the species from ocean prey by blending in with the extensive dark coastline lava rocks. An endemic subspecies of the yellow crowned night heron is often encountered at rocky tidal pools and mangroves, stalking fish and crabs. It is also not commonly seen around streetlights in towns, hawking insects. As you may be able to tell from these photos, this is the darkest subspecies of the yellow crowned night heron. An endemic subspecies of the American barn owl is one of two species of owl that occur in the Galapagos, the other being an endemic subspecies of the short-eared owl, which we unfortunately do not see. As suggested by this photo, the Galapagos barn owl is significantly smaller and darker than the North American subspecies. This is also true of the Galapagos short-eared owl. An endemic subspecies of the American flamingo is found in the Galapagos. The population is very small. We saw only, it's only a few hundred birds. We saw only 11 flamingos during our trip. The smooth-billed ani was introduced to the Galapagos and is one of two members of the cuckoo family that may be found there, the other being the dark-billed cuckoo, which is widespread in the neotropics. Anis feed on a variety of native wildlife and are also host to the invasive avian vampire fly, Philornis downsii, a parasite that causes extremely high trick mortality in many native bird species, including Darwin's finches. As a result, many scientists and local people think that anis should be removed from the Galapagos. A weakly differentiated subspecies of the American oystercatcher resides in the Galapagos. We saw 10 species of migratory shorebirds during our trip, but for timing reasons, I'm only including the wandering tattler because that's not a bird that we see here in the east. We saw several seabird species while traveling around the Galapagos by boat, in addition to the two frigatebird species and the boobies that I mentioned. Galapagos shearwater is an endemic breeder on the Galapagos, and until recently was considered to be a subspecies of Audubon shearwater, which is now known as the Sargasso shearwater. During our trip, we saw hundreds of this small dark brown and white shearwater from land and on our boat. This is a photo, as you might be able to tell from the internet. This is my photo, as you might be able to tell. The Galapagos petrel is endemic to the Galapagos and until recently was considered conspecific with the Hawaiian petrel and known as the dark rum petrel. The Galapagos petrel is most easily identified by its white forehead and a black stripe across its plain underwings, as shown in this photo from the internet. During our trip, we saw several Galapagos petrels, always farther from shore than Galapagos shearwaters. Elliott's storm petrel is represented by an endemic subspecies on the Galapagos. It is the common small storm petrel on the Galapagos. The population likely breeds there, but no nest has ever been found, and few have been found elsewhere. The feeding behavior of Elliott's storm petrel is unusual among storm petrels because it forages close to shore. All other storm petrels are exclusively pelagic. During our trip, we always saw Elliott's storm petrels in the back of our boat while we were close to shore. This photo from the internet notes the extent of the white band around its rump. The wedge rump storm petrel is represented by an endemic subspecies in the Galapagos, and it does breed at known sites there. It's distinguished from the Elliott's storm petrel by, among other things, that broad white band, wedge-shaped band on its rump and upper tail coverts. We saw a fair number of wedge-shaped storm petrels on our trip, always farther from shore than Elliott's storm petrels. This photo, again, as you may guess, is from the internet. The red-billed tropic bird nests on cliffs throughout the Galapagos, but during our trip, we only saw one near Daphne Major, which is the site of a large colony of the red-billed tropic bird. During the breeding season, tropic birds in the Galapagos often lose their long tail streamers to frigate birds who grab them to try to get the fish that they're carrying back to a sole nestling in a colony. There are two endemic species of sea lion on the Galapagos, one of which, the Galapagos sea lion, colonized from the north, likely from coastal Mexico, and the other of which colonized the Galapagos from the south, from the southern coast of South America, the Galapagos fur seal. The Galapagos sea lion is very similar to the slightly larger California sea lion, but recent genetic data confirms that it is a distinct species and that they separated about 2 million years ago. Galapagos sea lions are large, sexually dimorphic animals, mammals. Males average 6 feet in length and 550 pounds and have darker plumage or skin and a prominent bump on the forehead as compared with smaller females. Galapagos sea lions are common and easy to see because they spend a lot of time on coastal beaches or rocks and can even be found sleeping on a mainland pier or a boat. Because of their handsome appearance, clumsiness on land, and social and inquisitive nature, they are almost impossible not to like. A highlight of our trip was seeing a female seal bonding with a pup that had just been born by rubbing noses and picking it up with its mouth while the pup was trying to find a food source on the mother's body. This is a male, of course, Galapagos sea lion. They are ferocious. We watched this guy bellowing for, you know, end on end. This is a Galapagos sea lion on one of the boats we took to go snorkeling, just getting out of the water and resting. The Galapagos fur seal is actually an eared sea lion and not a seal. It should be named the Galapagos fur sea lion. It is similar in overall shape to the Galapagos sea lion, but it is smaller, and as its name suggests, it has a covering of fur. It also has very large eyes, an adaptation for nocturnal hunting for fish and squid. Galapagos fur seals are much less often observed than Galapagos sea lions because they are active at night, and during the day, they rest in shady areas on rocky ledges and crevices because their fur can make them overheat in the equatorial sun and not on open beaches, rocks, or piers like the Galapagos sea lion. The iconic Galapagos tortoise or Galapagos giant tortoise is one of the most famous animals on the Galapagos. And it's the largest species, living species of tortoise, a result of the lack of natural predators. Males are substantially larger than females and can range up to 5 to 6 feet in length and weigh up to 700 pounds, but have been recorded as high as 900 pounds, with size and weight varying among subspecies and individuals. This gives you some feel for the size as Wendy stands behind, smiling, looking at a Galapagos giant turtle. Giant tortoises once thrived on all continents except for Australia and Antarctica. But the Galapagos giant tortoise is now one of only 2 giant tortoises in the world, the others being the slightly smaller on average Aldabra giant tortoise, which is found on tiny Aldabra atoll off the southeast coast of Africa in the Indian Ocean. Just an interesting footnote, there are several Aldabra giant tortoises in our national zoo. Taxonomic authorities currently recognize at least 12 existing subspecies on 7 islands and 2 extinct subspecies of the Galapagos tortoise, but some authorities consider them separate species. Whether a single species with many subspecies or many species, the Galapagos giant tortoise is another example of allopatric evolutionary divergence on the Galapagos. During our trip, we only saw tortoises that had a domed upper shell, which keeps their heads low and limits their food sources to ground level vegetation such as grasses. In comparison, a saddleback upper shell of the type that we saw at the beginning of the presentation has an upward curve to the front that enables tortoises to lift their heads and necks higher and feed from higher growing plants such as prickly pear cactus. Because of a very slow metabolism, the Galapagos tortoise is one of the longest living vertebrates, with an average lifespan of over 100 years and up to 175 years in captivity. They have a unique adaptation that they can survive for up to a year without food or fresh water. These adaptations help explain how the ancestor of the Galapagos giant tortoise arrived from mainland South America by overwater dispersal 2 to 3 million years ago, likely via the Humboldt Current, and why Galapagos giant tortoises were exploited for centuries by whalers, fur sealers, and pirates who captured large numbers of them to keep them on ships for long periods as a source of food and oil without feeding them or giving them any water. Currently, there are 4 species of endemic iguanas on the islands, consisting of 1 marine iguana and 3 land iguanas. 2 species are easily seen by most tourists, the marine iguana and the Galapagos land iguana. The marine iguana is one of the largest lizards in the world and the only one with the ability to live and forage at sea. Males are substantially larger than females and can grow to a length of 3 to 5 feet. Marine iguanas live on a diet of algae, which they browse from exposed rocks when the tide is low or dive to when the tide is high. Like all reptiles, marine iguanas are cold-blooded, and as a result, they are unable to move effectively until they warm up in the sun and can only spend a limited amount of time in cold water. The dark color of marine iguanas allows them to rapidly absorb heat to minimize the period of lethargy. These photos show hundreds of marine iguanas that were totally motionless in the early morning sun on Fernandina Island. We stood right next to them, and none of them so much as opened an eye. The Galapagos land iguana is similarly sized and may be seen on the Galapagos as soon as you depart your plane on Baltra Airport walking to the terminal. Like marine iguanas, land iguanas are cold-blooded and raise their body temperature by basking in the sun at night and sleep in burrows to conserve their absorbed body heat. Land iguanas used to roam the several islands of the Galapagos in vast hordes, but their numbers have been substantially reduced, and now they are much less abundant than marine iguanas. Restoration programs have aided in restoring them, including on Santiago and Baltra Islands, following their extirpation there, but they remain far less abundant than during historical times. That concludes the presentation. I would be glad to try to answer any questions that you may have. Like this. Any questions? Comments? Anything? Do you want to hand the microphone in?
Thank you. It's a great presentation. So you mentioned that the lava gulls and American flamingos have a stable population of less than 500 species. Is that because of human interaction? 400 pairs, right? Is that because of human interaction, or is it just natural population dynamics? Wow. So it's likely it's been like that for thousands of years? Wow.
We can't hear Gary's response.
Thank you.
Oh, right. We have that noted.
Todd, you have a question?
Thanks. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Did I hear you right when you said that the great frigate bird was a subspecies of the magnificent frigate bird?
No. The great frigate bird is a separate species. The magnificent frigate bird is represented by an endemic subspecies on the Galapagos. They're 2 separate species.
Yeah, that's right.
Difficult to separate. Any other questions?
Excellent presentation. Just kind of logistics. How long did it take you to actually get there from here? And how long was your actual trip?
Question was, how do we get there and how long was the trip? Well, we flew from Washington, D.C. to Miami to Guayaquil. It's several hours in each leg. I don't remember specifically how much, but it's very manageable. I mean, that's one of the great things about Central and South America. They're so easy to get to. I remember, I don't know, Wendy, you may remember, it was like a couple-hour flight to get from, but from Guayaquil to Baltra, it was maybe a couple hours or an hour and a half. Relatively short flights, only 500, 600 miles. I think our trip was about 11, 12 days. And it's interesting, they run trips. We crossed and visited Central and Western islands. They also run, actually we're running a consecutive trip that focused on other islands in the South and the North. And we would very much like to do that someday. There's a couple of birds that we missed that we would love to have seen, like waved albatross. We actually found a carcass of one on one of our islands, but the Galapagos is primarily where that species breeds. It's a near endemic, and on Espanola Island, you can see hundreds of them breeding there.
The pink flamingos, do you remember which island you saw those on? Okay.
Probably Florida. They can occur anywhere. There are certain species, I mean, not all these species are seen on all islands. For example, the Galapagos penguin and the flightless cormorant are only seen in the western part of the Galapagos, Fernandina, and the northern and west coast of Isabella. They rely on prey coming from the cold water currents that brush up on the western side of the islands. The flamingos, I'm not sure if, how, widespread or limited they are. There's not very many of them, no. No, there's no dumb questions. There's dumb answers, but there's no dumb questions. If someone's going in a few weeks, let's talk about these books really briefly. October. Yeah. Well, it was breeding time for some of the seabirds that we're seeing, for sure, the boobies and the frigate birds. I think you can go anytime to the Galapagos and have a great time.
Right, so.
Well, I didn't really split them up like that, but go ahead. You don't do much hiking in the Galapagos. You basically go by boat to visit various islands, and then you have very short visits. You don't take long extended hikes. So you're primarily on the coast on most islands. And while you're on the coast, you can see any number of migratory shorebirds, including, a resident oyster catcher, as you saw as well. We saw, 10 species, but, nothing terribly exciting. I did get some really nice photographs of, whimbrels and other shorebirds, but in the interest of time, I just limited it to the wandering tattler to show you here tonight. Seabirds you could be seeing, from your boat or from land. I'm not sure quite what you mean by water birds. Seabirds, yeah, seabirds the great thing about going by boat around the Galapagos is, always, be outside looking for whatever you may see, because you can see some great birds, as I, discuss in my presentation. I hope that gives you some answer, but if you're going, there are a number of good books to read here. If you're going to buy one book on a visit to the Galapagos or just general readership, the second book there, Critcher and Laughlin's The Galapagos and Natural History, is absolutely fantastic. Be sure you get the second edition. The Beak of the Finch is a Pulitzer Prize winning The Grant Studies of Darwin's Finches. It's very readable, and it's really terrific. It'll take you through the first 2 droughts. It won't cover the 3rd drought that I discussed, or the big bird lineage. The definitive book on Darwin's Finches came out last year, Peter and Rosemary Grant's 40 Years of Evolution of Darwin's Finches on Daphne Major. Any more questions? You guys are easy. No questions on evolution? No questions on Darwin's Finches? I was worried about being too technical with the, okay.
Thank you very much, Gerry. This was great. Occasionally, we encountered birds that we're used to seeing here. We saw a couple of sanderlings. We saw also some black-bellied plovers, or was it golden-bellied plovers? But anyway, and what surprised me, or what surprised us in general, was a certain number of cattle egrets that we met. Yeah. Do you have any idea how they arrived at to the Galapagos?
The question was, how did cattle egrets get to the Galapagos? And, the answer is they, have colonized everywhere. There's no, no magic to that. But you go to the Galapagos not to see cattle egrets or migratory shorebirds that we can see here in the east. You go to see the endemic birds, mammals, and reptiles. You go there for, the incredible natural habitats and wildlife. You don't go to see the Galapagos for ruins, cultural activities, or people. Any other questions? I think it was about 12 nights or 10, 11 nights on the boat. By the way, I can't say enough about Galapagos expeditions and Fausto Rodriguez and Irby Lovett. They were absolutely fantastic. Irby Lovett would give talks at lunches during the day on interesting topics. He actually, when he was a young student, was an assistant to the Grants during one of their early years when they started their studies of on Daphne Major. And he's obviously a very, very knowledgeable man. Fausto Rodriguez is incredibly personal and knows the Galapagos backwards and forwards, having been a long-time resident there. So if you're interested, there's various different ways to explore the Galapagos, but you can't go wrong with Galapagos expeditions and Irby and Fausto. Oh, geez, honest to God, I don't keep track of that stuff. We saw 8 species of Darwin's finch. We missed a bird that I was hoping to see, the vegetarian finch. It's a very large finch. It's one of the oldest finches. It's one of the only birds that's known to eat leaves. And it's fascinating because it's next to the warbler finches in the taxonomic treatment. The warbler finches are the smallest and least finch-like, and then you have this gigantic vegetarian finch. There's something that obviously occurred in between, but what, we don't know. It's very difficult to see all of the Darwin's finches. He's never seen them. The mangrove finch there's very few that remain. It's virtually extinct. Others live on remote islands in the Northwest, a vampire finch, for example, that you really have to make special efforts to go see. Not all tours visit these islands. Generally, tours on the Galapagos are highly regulated, particularly the larger boats. They have itineraries that they have to follow and only can land on certain islands at certain times, making it even harder to go after Darwin's finches. But what's fascinating about them is what they teach us about evolution and evolutionary biology, which I tried to convey, in this presentation. Any more questions? Well, if there's no more questions, again, thank you for your interest and support. And I also want to give a shout out to all the people who helped me set up, particularly Mark England, who I met a couple of times and greatly appreciate, what we did for you. Yeah, and Emily too. So anyway, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.